The grand selection hall of the Virilan Empire shone with silver light. Tall pillars of crystal reflected the glow of distant stars, and hundreds of alien warriors stood in perfect lines. They came from every corner of the galaxy, each one strong, powerful, and eager to serve their ruler. At the end of the hall, sitting upon a throne carved from white stone, was Queen Thalira, ruler of 10 star systems and bearer of the crown of light. Her presence alone demanded silence. Her long robes shimmered like liquid moonlight. Her violet eyes moved slowly over the gathered soldiers. Every few moments she would lift her hand and one warrior would be chosen to join her royal guard, the most honorable and dangerous duty in the Empire. Those chosen would stand by her side in battle and protect her with their lives. But among the thousands, one stood out, not because of strength or armor, but because of how ordinary he looked. He was shorter than the rest, his body thinner, his skin pale. No scales, no claws, no horns, just soft flesh and a calm face. A human. Whispers spread through the hall like fire. A human? Why is he even here? They are weak. They can't even survive half our gravity. Surely this is a mistake. Yet the man stood tall, unshaken by their laughter. His name was Elias Kane, a soldier from a small blue planet that the galaxy often ignored. He wore simple armor, patched and scratched, with a small insignia of Earth on his chest. His eyes, calm, gray, and distant, looked straight ahead, never lowering, not even when the Queen's gaze fell upon him. Thalira tilted her head slightly, studying him. "A human?" she said, her voice clear and cold. "You wish to serve in my royal guard?" Elias's voice was quiet but steady. "Yes, my queen." The hall filled with soft laughter. Even her advisors couldn't hide their smirks. One of them stepped forward, whispering, "My queen, forgive me, but this species is fragile. Their world is primitive. Their technology is decades behind ours. He cannot protect you." Thalira raised her hand, silencing him. Her eyes did not leave the human. "Tell me, Elias Kane," she said. "What makes you believe you are worthy of standing among my warriors?" Elias didn't boast. He didn't try to explain. He simply looked at her and said, "Because I don't stop." His words were plain, but they carried weight. The hall grew quiet for a moment. Even the Queen felt a strange pull in her chest, a feeling she hadn't known in years. "Don't stop," she repeated. Elias nodded slowly. "No matter what happens. No matter who doubts me. I don't stop." It was such a simple statement, yet there was something in his eyes, something strong, deep, unbreakable. The Queen leaned back on her throne, thinking. She had seen hundreds of warriors stronger than him, faster, more skilled, but never one who spoke like that. Never one who looked at her as an equal, not as a goddess. Her advisor spoke again, uneasy. "Your Majesty, this is unwise." "Enough," Thalira said, her tone firm. "The selection is mine to make." She stood from her throne, her tall form casting a long shadow across the marble floor. "Very well, human," she said softly. "If you truly believe in your strength, then you will have your chance. From this day forward you serve under me." The hall erupted in disbelief. Many bowed in confusion. Others murmured in anger. But Elias simply nodded once. "As you command, my queen." Thalira watched him leave the hall. There was something strange about the human. A quiet fire that no one else seemed to see. She couldn't explain it, but a thought whispered in the back of her mind. Perhaps strength was not only about power. And though she didn't know it yet, the small human she chose that day would soon change her empire forever. The next morning, the training arena of the royal palace echoed with the clash of metal and the heavy breathing of soldiers. The royal guards, chosen from the strongest races in the empire, were sparring to prove their worth. In the center of them stood Elias Kane, the only human in the Queen's army. From the stands above, Queen Thalira watched in silence. Her long cloak fluttered softly as she observed her newest guard. Around her, the other officers whispered. "He will not last an hour," one said. "The Queen has gone soft," another added. Thalira didn't answer. Her violet eyes stayed fixed on the human below. Elias held a simple practice staff. Across from him stood a massive warrior from the Grath species, 3 meters tall, covered in thick armor plates. When the signal horn sounded, the alien roared and charged forward like a beast. The human didn't move. He waited. Just as the alien swung his heavy weapon, Elias stepped aside, letting it pass. The staff in his hand struck once, quick and sharp, against the alien's knee joint. The larger creature stumbled but recovered instantly, throwing another blow that sent Elias flying to the ground. Gasps filled the arena. The alien laughed. "Weak," he bellowed. "Soft flesh. You don't belong here." Elias wiped blood from his lip and stood again. He said nothing. He simply raised his staff. The alien attacked once more, and again Elias dodged, struck, fell, and rose. Over and over the same rhythm, defeat, pain, and yet never surrender. Thalira found herself leaning forward. Something about the way he moved caught her attention. He was not fighting to win. He was fighting to learn. Every fall, every bruise, he turned it into progress. His movements grew smoother, faster, more controlled. Hours later, when the training ended, Elias could barely stand. His arms shook, his armor dented, his lip bleeding. But when the queen called his name, he lifted his head and saluted. "Still standing," he said, his voice tired but firm. The queen walked down from the stands, her presence commanding silence. She stopped before him. "You are injured," she said. "It will heal," he replied. Thalira studied him closely. "Why do you not use our medical enhancers? They would restore your strength within minutes." Elias looked at her, his gray eyes calm. "Because pain teaches, my queen. If I remove it, I lose the lesson." Her eyes widened slightly. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Among her people, weakness was hidden, avoided. Yet this human, broken, bleeding, and exhausted, stood before her with pride. That night, as the palace lights dimmed, Elias continued to train alone in the empty arena. The guards passing by watched in disbelief. He practiced every strike, every dodge, again and again until his arms trembled. When one of the alien soldiers approached and mocked him, saying, "You'll die before you ever earn our respect," Elias only smiled. "Then I'll die trying," he said simply. Returning to his drills, up above, hidden behind a glass window, Queen Thalira watched in silence. The faintest smile touched her lips, a smile of curiosity and respect. There was something about the human that stirred emotions she hadn't felt in centuries. The next morning, she summoned him to the royal garden. "You trained all night," she said as he stood before her, eyes heavy but proud. "Yes, my queen. You could have rested." "I could have," he said softly, "but I didn't come here to rest." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she turned away, her voice low. "You are different, human. Not strong like the others, but strong in another way." Elias gave a small nod. "Where I come from, strength isn't just muscle or power. It's the will to keep moving when everyone else stops." As he walked away, Thalira's eyes followed him. For the first time, she wondered if she had underestimated his kind. Beneath that fragile frame was something her empire had long forgotten, the strength of the heart. And deep inside her, something began to change. The peace of the Virellan Empire did not last long. One morning, the skies above the capital turned red. Strange energy waves rippled across the horizon, and the ground shook as the alarm sirens echoed through every corridor of the palace. Queen Thalira stood at the balcony of her throne chamber, staring at the burning clouds. Her generals rushed in, faces pale with fear. "My queen," one of them said quickly, "the Karth Dominion has crossed our borders. Their fleet numbers in the thousands. They will reach us by dawn." A heavy silence filled the room. The Karth were not ordinary enemies. They were destroyers, conquerors of entire civilizations. Their ships consumed planets, leaving only ashes behind. Even Thalira, known for her calmness, felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She turned to her generals. "Prepare the defense fleet. Evacuate the outer colonies. I will lead the capital's defense myself." Her guards bowed and hurried out. Only one remained, Elias Kane, the human. He stood quietly at the edge of the chamber, his armor scratched from training, but his eyes calm. "Human," Thalira said, walking toward him. "You will remain in the palace. This is not your war." Elias looked up at her, his voice steady. "You selected me, my queen. My duty is to stand where you stand." She frowned slightly. "You don't understand, Elias. The Karth are not like the soldiers you've trained with. They are monsters. They will crush anything in their path." He met her gaze without fear. "Then let them try." For a moment neither spoke. Then Thalira sighed softly. There was something about his calmness, something strange and steady that made her heart feel less heavy. "Very well," she said quietly. "But stay close to me. If you die, I will personally see to it that Earth is never mentioned again." Elias smiled faintly. "Understood." When the first Karth ships entered orbit, the world lit up with fire. Their weapons tore through defense satellites and burned through the shields protecting the capital. The Queen's armies launched into the sky, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. From the palace courtyard, Elias watched the horizon burn. He saw Virilan ships fall like hooting stars. He saw soldiers running, shouting, dying, but through all the chaos he remained calm. Queen Thalira stood beside him, her crystal armor glowing under the storm of explosions. "They are breaking through our outer walls," she said. "If we don't stop them here, everything will fall." Elias looked at her quietly. "Then we don't let them pass." Before she could stop him, he moved forward, straight into the battlefield. The alien soldiers around him stared in disbelief. A human charging into war without hesitation. The first wave of Karth warriors hit hard. Massive dark creatures with metal skin and burning eyes stormed the palace gates. Elias fired his old human rifle, a weapon that looked weak compared to the shining plasma guns of the Virilans. But his aim was perfect. Every shot hit its mark. Every movement was precise. He fought beside the Queen's soldiers, shouting orders, pulling the wounded back, holding the line. The aliens around him began to follow his lead, inspired by the strange fire in his voice. From the high balcony, Thalira watched him through the smoke. Her generals shouted for retreat, but she couldn't move. Her eyes were locked on that small human figure, standing tall in the middle of destruction, refusing to fall. Her heart tightened. She had seen countless warriors fight with power, but none with such will. He was only one man among thousands, yet he fought as if the fate of the entire galaxy rested on his shoulders. When the night deepened and the air filled with dust and blood, the Queen finally descended to the ground. She stood beside him, her sword blazing. Elias glanced at her, sweat running down his face. "You came," he said. Thalira lifted her blade and smiled faintly. "I said you wouldn't face them alone." Together, they stood shoulder to shoulder, the mighty alien queen and the fragile human, facing the endless dark that threatened to consume them all. And for the first time in her reign, Thalira understood. The strength she saw in Elias was not of body or blood. It was the strength of the heart, the strength that refused to surrender even when the universe demanded it. The battlefield was chaos. The night sky burned red with falling ships, and the air was filled with the sound of screaming engines and breaking metal. The palace grounds, once shining with beauty, were now covered in dust, fire, and blood. Queen Thalira stood among her soldiers, her crystal armor cracked, her breathing heavy. She had fought many wars, but never one like this. The Karth Dominion's strength was beyond anything she had imagined. Their dark soldiers kept coming, wave after wave, or like an endless storm. Her army was breaking. The Virilan soldiers were falling back, shields flickering and weapons overheating. Even the strongest among them looked frightened now. And in the middle of that chaos stood Elias Kane, the lone human, his rifle smoking in his hands. He was covered in dust and blood, his armor scorched, but his eyes still burned with that same unshaken light. Thalira saw him from across the field. He was fighting alone, protecting the wounded, covering their retreat. Every time a Karth warrior came close, Elias moved like lightning, quick, precise, fearless. But even she could see he was reaching his limit. "Elias," she shouted through the comms. "Fall back! That's an order." His reply came through static, calm but firm. "Can't do that, my queen. If I fall back, they'll reach you." Thalira clenched her teeth. "You will die. Then I'll die doing what you chose me for," he answered. Before she could respond, an explosion ripped through the field. The shockwave threw her off her feet. When the smoke cleared, she saw dozens of Karth soldiers advancing toward her, huge armored beasts with glowing red visors. She tried to stand, but her leg armor was damaged. Her guards rushed forward to protect her, but they were too few. She raised her sword to fight again, and that's when a figure stepped in front of her. Elias. His armor was almost broken, his rifle destroyed, his face streaked with dirt. But he stood tall between her and the enemy. "Move aside, human," one of her generals shouted. "You cannot fight them alone." Elias ignored him. He reached to his wrist where a strange device was strapped, something old, dull, and human-made. Thalira frowned. "What is that?" He didn't answer. He just whispered, "Time to stop running." Then he pressed the switch. The world went silent. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the air itself began to glow, a deep blue light spreading out from Elias like ripples in water. The ground shook. The wind howled, every Karth soldier froze in place. Their armor began to hum, their weapons short-circuited, and then, one by one, they collapsed, sparks flying from their bodies. Above them, the sky flashed as entire enemy ships lost power and began to fall, crashing into the ground like dying stars. The pulse of energy was so strong that even Thalira's soldiers had to cover their eyes. It was not a weapon she recognized. It was human, but something no alien science had ever seen before. When the light faded, Elias was still standing, breathing hard. The device on his wrist was broken, smoke rising from it. The battlefield was silent now. Thousands of Karth soldiers lay still. Only the wind moved. Thalira stared at him, her voice trembling. What did you do?" Elias turned slowly, his face pale but calm. "An old Earth design," he said softly. "A quantum resonance field. It shuts down all synthetic power in a certain radius." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "That's impossible. No living being can activate such a field and survive." He smiled faintly. "Guess nobody told me that." For a moment, neither spoke. The Queen stepped closer, her heart racing. There was smoke rising from his armor and his hands were trembling, but he was still alive, still standing. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "Because you wouldn't have believed me," he said. "And I didn't come here to show power. I came here to protect you." Her breath caught. For the first time in her long reign, Queen Thalira didn't know what to say. She had seen gods of war, creatures of destruction, but never a soul like his. A fragile being of flesh and blood who carried power that could shake worlds. And as she looked at him, the small, scarred human who had just saved her empire, she finally understood why humanity, so small and so young, could never truly be underestimated. Because inside them burned something no weapon could ever create, the will to stand, no matter the cost. The battlefield was quiet now. Smoke rose from the broken ships and the smell of metal and dust filled the air. The once shining walls of the palace were cracked and blackened, but the enemy was gone. The Karth Dominion had retreated. The impossible had happened. They were defeated. Queen Thalira stood among the ruins, her eyes searching for one figure. Her heart, which had always been calm and cold, now pounded in her chest. Then she saw him, Elias Kane, standing near the edge of the courtyard, his armor shattered, his body trembling from exhaustion. He looked nothing like the powerful being who had destroyed the enemy moments ago. His shoulders were heavy, his face pale, and his breathing uneven. Yet, when she walked toward him, he still straightened himself and saluted weakly. "My queen," he said, his voice hoarse. "The field is clear." Thalira stopped in front of him. "You disobeyed my direct order," she said softly. "I told you to stay behind." He gave a tired smile. "You chose me to serve, not to hide." Her chest tightened. She wanted to scold him, to remind him of protocol, but the words wouldn't come. All she could see was the human who had stood alone between her and death, the man who had faced an empire's greatest enemy without fear. She looked at the broken device on his wrist. "That weapon, no one has ever survived using it. How are you still alive?" Elias looked down at his burned arm and shook his head slowly. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I shouldn't be. But where I come from, we don't think about dying. We just keep going." The Queen studied his face. There was no pride in his words, no arrogance, and only calm truth. She saw pain, yes, but also something else, a deep strength that came not from power but from the heart. The silence between them stretched. The wind carried the faint sound of fires still burning in the distance. Finally, she said quietly, "You saved my empire." Elias met her gaze. "No, my queen, we saved it." Her lips parted, but she couldn't speak. No one had ever spoken to her like that and as an equal. Everyone bowed, everyone feared her. But this human, standing broken and bleeding, dared to share her burden instead of worshipping her crown. She stepped closer. "You risked your life without hesitation." "Why?" he smiled faintly. "Because that's what we do. Back on Earth there's a saying, you protect what you care for even if it costs you everything." Her eyes softened. "And you care for a queen of another world?" Elias chuckled quietly. "I care for what's right. For the people who believe in something bigger than themselves. You fight for your empire. I fight for hope. Maybe that's the same thing." Thalira looked away, trying to hide the strange feeling rising in her chest. No one had ever made her feel this way. Proud, humbled, and confused all at once. For centuries she had led through fear and strength. Yet this fragile human had shown her something else. Courage born not from power, but from love and purpose. "Come," she said finally, her voice gentle. "You need rest." Elias hesitated, then nodded. As she helped him walk back toward the palace, every soldier they passed bowed their heads. Even the proudest Virellan warriors lowered their weapons in respect. That night the queen couldn't sleep. She stood by her window watching the stars shimmer over her wounded world. The memory of Elias's words echoed in her mind. You protect what you care for, even if it costs you everything. For the first time in her long reign, Thalira realized that power was not what kept her empire alive. It was the will to protect, the courage to stand and the heart to care, and somewhere deep inside, a new emotion bloomed, one she didn't recognize at first, but one she could no longer deny: admiration, respect, and perhaps something even more fragile. The queen of 1,000 worlds had been humbled by a single human. Days passed after the great battle, but the scars of war still marked the Virellan capital. The once bright towers were darkened by smoke, and the streets were filled with quiet voices instead of laughter. Yet among all that sorrow there was peace, a fragile peace born from sacrifice. Elias Kane spent most of his days in the recovery wing. His injuries were deep, burns on his arms, cuts across his back, and his body weakened from the energy surge he had unleashed. The healers were amazed he was still alive. No alien, no creature of any kind had ever survived such a power before. But every morning he forced himself to stand, to walk again, even when his body begged for rest. "I'm not broken," he said each time the doctors tried to stop him. "I'm just getting back up." From the balcony above, Queen Thalira often watched him in silence. She saw the pain in his movements, but also the fire in his will. Each day he reminded her of what she had forgotten, what true strength really meant. One evening, when the twin moons rose over the city, Thalira decided to visit him. She entered his chamber quietly. He was standing by the window looking out at the stars, his arm wrapped in bandages. When he turned and saw her, he bowed his head slightly. "My queen," he said softly. "You should be resting," Thalira replied, stepping closer. "I can rest later," he said with a small smile. "There's too much to fix out there." Thalira sighed gently. "You have already done enough. You saved this world. You saved me." Elias looked at her, his eyes calm as ever. "I didn't save you because you're a queen," he said. "I did it because it was right." His words struck her deeply. She lowered her gaze. "When I first saw you, I thought you were weak, a fragile creature trying to stand among gods." "I was wrong," Elias smiled faintly. "You weren't wrong. Humans are fragile. We bleed, we break, we cry. But we also get up again. That's what makes us who we are." For a long time there was silence between them. The cool night breeze passed through the open window, carrying the faint scent of burnt metal and rain. "You changed me, Elias." Thalira said quietly. For centuries I ruled through strength and fear. I believed that only the powerful could survive, but you showed me another way. Elias looked at her kindly. Maybe you just needed to remember what it feels like to fight for something real. Her violet eyes softened. And what do you fight for, human? He turned back to the stars. For home. For peace. For people who can't fight for themselves. And sometimes, for those who still believe there's something good left in the universe. Thalira stood beside him, her heart strangely heavy and warm at the same time. She had seen countless warriors, countless victories, but none of them had ever made her feel like this. With Elias, she felt seen, not as a ruler, but as someone human too, flawed, afraid, and trying her best. Your people, she asked softly, do they all carry hearts like yours? Elias chuckled quietly. Not all. But enough of us try. She smiled at his answer, a real smile, small and gentle. For the first time in centuries it reached her eyes. You are not like anyone I've ever known, she admitted. You have no throne, no power, no titles, and yet you make others want to stand beside you. He looked at her, his gray eyes full of quiet warmth. Maybe that's all real power is, my queen. Making others believe they can stand too. The queen's heart ached at those words. For so long she had ruled alone, surrounded by fear and obedience. But now, standing beside this human, she felt something she had never known before. Peace. As the stars glimmered above them, Thalira whispered, Elias Kane, you've given me more than victory. You've given me hope. He bowed his head slightly, his voice gentle. Then my mission is complete. But in her heart, Thalira knew it was far from over. For the first time, she didn't just see him as her guard. She saw him as something far more important. The reminder that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, the light of humanity could still burn brighter than any star. Weeks turned into months after the battle that changed the fate of the Virilan Empire. The wounds of war slowly began to heal. Towers were rebuilt, cities were cleaned, and hope started to return to the hearts of the people. But for Queen Thalira, something deeper had changed, something she could never undo. She had seen the power of a human heart. She had seen what courage truly looked like. Elias Kane, the human warrior she had once chosen out of curiosity, had become a symbol. His name spread across world, whispered by soldiers, sung by children, remembered by the weak and the strong alike. To many, he was the protector who fought beside a queen, but to Thalira he was more than that. He was the one who had shown her what it truly meant to lead. One morning the queen received troubling news. A distant colony, still under rebel influence, had begun to rise again. Her generals gathered and spoke of more bloodshed, more war. But as they argued, Thalira stood silently by the grand window of her throne room, her thoughts far away. Elias entered quietly, his steps light but firm. His body still bore scars from the last battle, yet his presence filled the room with calm strength. You're thinking about another war, he said softly. Thalira looked at him, her eyes tired but clear. I'm thinking about peace, she replied. But it seems every path to peace begins with a sword. Elias stepped closer. Then maybe it's time someone showed them a different way. Her eyes lifted toward him, curious. And how would you do that, human? He smiled faintly. Not with fire. With faith. Those words stayed in her mind long after he left the room. For centuries, her people had ruled through dominance, through the power of fear. But Elias, this single fragile human, believed that hearts could be changed, not conquered. Days later, when she addressed the Empire in a great assembly, she surprised everyone. Instead of announcing another campaign, she declared a treaty of unity. It was an agreement of peace, compassion, and rebuilding, signed not with soldiers, but with hope. And when the people asked who inspired her decision, she simply said, A human taught me that true strength lies not in how many enemies you defeat, but in how many lives you protect. The entire hall fell silent. For the first time in generations, the queen spoke not as a ruler above all, but as someone standing with her people. After the ceremony, Thalira found Elias standing outside, looking toward the horizon. The light of the twin suns touched his face, and the gentle wind carried the distant songs of the crowd. "They will remember this day," she said softly. Elias turned, smiling a little. "Then maybe we've finally done something that matters." "You've done more than that," Thalira replied. "You've changed me. You've changed us." He looked away, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe that's what humans do best. We make things a little brighter before we fade." Thalira's chest tightened at his words. "Fade? You speak as if you're leaving." He nodded slowly. "My time here is done, Thalira. My people, they'll come looking for me. And I think your world is safe now." The queen's breath caught. She had expected this moment, but not how much it would hurt. "And what of me?" she whispered. He stepped closer, placing his hand over his heart. "You'll do what you've always done, lead. But now you'll lead with compassion. That's something no one can take away." Her eyes glistened with tears, something rare for a ruler who had seen centuries of war. "You are more than a soldier, Elias Kane. You are—" "A light that came when I was lost," he smiled. "Soft, kind, human. Then I'll take that light with me." When his transport finally lifted from the palace courtyard, thousands gathered to watch. The queen stood at the highest balcony, her royal armor shining, her heart aching with pride and sorrow. As the ship rose into the heavens, she whispered to herself, "The stars will remember your name, human. So will I." And long after the human was gone, the story of Elias Kane lived on. A legend passed from one generation to the next. The Virellan Empire entered a new age of peace, guided by the lessons of one man who had no throne, no crown, and yet became mightier than any king. For in the vast galaxy, among endless races and empires, the name human came to mean something more. Not weakness, not fragility, but a will that could move worlds. And in the quiet nights, when Queen Thalira looked to the stars, she would always smile and whisper, "He made me believe."